You are still standing, still breathing, still undefeated, while they were betting on your collapse. Let that sink in. You are here, intact, aware, unbroken. The person who wanted to see you lose, who whispered your downfall into dark corners, who prayed for your delay and your destruction, badly failed. Not because they weren't determined, but because you were chosen, because you were capable, because help greater than human strategy stood beside you. And now there is nothing left that can truly stop you, because you have decided fully, consciously, and without apology, that you are moving forward into more success. This is not motivation for everyone. This is for the ones who survived pressure that should have crushed them, for the ones who were underestimated, watched, envied, and quietly opposed, for the ones who didn't just face resistance, but faced organized resistance. And yet here you are. Understand this clearly. Your survival is already a defeat for your enemies. Your clarity is already a loss for them. They wanted confusion. You found direction. They wanted hesitation. You found resolve. They wanted you exhausted, doubting yourself, shrinking back into something manageable. Instead, you're still rising. And that alone has rewritten the power dynamics. You may not have realized it at the time, but every delay strengthened you. Every silent battle sharpened you. Every moment you thought you were alone was actually preparation. Because chosen people don't win fast. They win inevitably. And that inevitability is what unsettles the enemy the most. Here's the truth they don't want you to accept yet. Once a person decides internally that they are done playing small, the game changes permanently. Not externally, internally. And the moment that internal decision locks in, the world starts responding differently. Doors don't just open. Obstacles start malfunctioning. Opposition becomes desperate. People who once felt powerful around you start losing their grip. You don't even have to announce your intention. Your energy carries the message ahead of you. That's why control breaks around you. That's why people who run everything start running out of certainty when you walk in. Because you are no longer asking for space. You are the space. You are no longer seeking permission. You are operating from assignment. And there is a difference the world can feel instantly. You might be thinking, why did it have to be this hard? Why so much resistance if I was meant to succeed? Because pressure reveals capacity. Because ease never forges authority. Because the kind of success you are stepping into cannot be sustained by ego or luck. It requires depth, endurance, and alignment. What tried to stop you was not random. It was resistance to your trajectory. And now comes the dangerous part for them. You didn't just survive. You decided. You made a choice that most people never make. To stop negotiating with fear, to stop explaining yourself, to stop waiting for validation. When that decision lands, momentum becomes violent, not chaotic, but unstoppable. Because a person who knows who they are and where they're going doesn't need approval, doesn't need noise, doesn't need to rush. They move with gravity. This is why nothing can block you now. Not because there will be no obstacles, but because obstacles no longer define you. You've already faced the worst part, the internal war, and you won. From this point forward, success isn't a question of if, but how much and how far. The path may still demand discipline, patience, and focus, but it no longer demands permission. You have crossed that threshold already. So let them watch. Let them wonder how you're still standing. Let them feel uncomfortable around your certainty. Let them realize too late that what they tried to stop has already outgrown them. You are alive. You are protected. You are capable. And now you are decided. Before we go any further, take a moment to stand with us. If this message spoke to you, if it strengthened you, challenged you, or reminded you who you are, then support this work. Like this video so the message reaches others who need it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you're able, consider supporting us through Super Thanks. Your support helps this team continue putting in the time, energy, and effort to create inspiring, life-changing, high-impact videos like this. Content that empowers, awakens, and fuels those who are meant for more. Number 1. True strength begins when you see beyond surface power. Power built on appearance collapses the moment it meets someone who sees clearly. Listen closely, because this is where the real separation begins. You've been told your whole life that strength looks loud, dominant, untouchable. That the person who controls the room is the one with the most authority, the sharpest voice, the biggest shadow. That's the lie. True strength begins the moment you stop reacting to surface power and start seeing what's underneath it. And the reason you unsettle certain people is simple. You do exactly that without trying. He built himself to be unchallenged, not debated, not questioned, not examined. People orbit him with fear, admiration, dependence, or ambition. They respond to the layers, the title, the reputation, the posture, the history. And because no one ever looks past those layers, he's convinced himself that the layers are the power, that the armor is the man, that control is permanent. Until you walk in, you don't bow to the image. You don't freeze at the reputation. You don't adjust your tone to match his authority. And the moment you don't react the way everyone else does, something breaks. Not outwardly at first, but internally. Because power that depends on reaction dies in the presence of someone who doesn't play along. This is where you might ask yourself, why does this always happen around me? Why do confident people become tense, guarded, or strangely self-aware? It's not because you're aggressive. It's not because you're challenging them. It's because you see through performance instinctively. You respond to essence, not display. And that's the one thing people who rely on dominance never prepare for. He walks through the world wearing a personality forged for survival, controlled, strategic, composed. It's a costume that's kept him safe and in charge for a long time. But around you, that costume feels wrong. Too heavy, too obvious, too artificial, because you don't reward it, you don't validate it, you don't fear it. You look straight through it. And that's what hits him. Not your courage, your clarity, not your confidence, your honesty. You engage with him as a human being, not a myth. You don't attack the armor, but you don't respect it either. You bypass it completely. And suddenly, he's exposed in a way he hasn't experienced before. You notice things others miss. The hesitation hidden behind certainty, the insecurity masked by command, the softness buried under hardness. You don't point it out, you don't confront it, but you see it. And being seen without consent is deeply destabilizing to someone who has spent years hiding behind authority. Here's the metaphor that matters. Everyone else argues with the shadow. You walk straight toward the source of the light. And when you do that, the shadow loses meaning. He's not used to that. He's never had defenses prepared for someone who doesn't fight the illusion, but ignores it. That's why his guard drops around you, even when he doesn't want it to. That's why his control slips without warning. That's why his confidence recalibrates in your presence. Not because you're trying to take power, but because you operate from a place where false power doesn't register. This is the mark of someone chosen, not by fate or belief, but by temperament. You are wired to see reality, not theater. And that alone is enough to shake anyone whose strength depends on being untouchable. Remember this, when armor fails, it's not because you struck it, it's because it was never real strength to begin with. Number 2, unpredictability becomes power when it comes from authenticity. When someone can't predict you, they can't dominate you, and that's where fear begins. This is where your difference turns into undeniable leverage. Not because you planned it, not because you calculated it, but because you move from something deeper than strategy. He spent his entire life perfecting control, every gesture refined, every word measured, every reaction anticipated before it happens. He learned how people think, how they respond under pressure, how to guide outcomes without ever looking like he's forcing them. That's how his influence grew. He didn't overpower people, he outmaneuvered them. He turned predictability into a weapon. And then you showed up. Not chaotic, not reckless, just real. And reality is the one variable his system can't account for. You don't respond the way others do. You don't mirror his energy. You don't play defense. You don't rise when he provokes or shrink when he asserts. You move from an internal compass that doesn't bend to external pressure. And that's what fractures his sense of dominance. Because everything he's built relies on one assumption, that people will behave according to patterns. Fear, desire, validation, ambition, he knows how to pull those strings. But you don't have strings he can see. This is where the tension starts. He realizes quickly that his usual tools don't work. Authority doesn't intimidate you. Charm doesn't disarm you. Power doesn't impress you. And because you're not reacting, he's forced into a position he hates, responding, adjusting, watching, guessing. For the first time, he's not ahead of the moment. He's inside it, exposed to uncertainty. You might not notice it at first, but others do. The slight hesitation before he speaks, the extra attention in his eyes, the recalculation mid-sentence. He's trying to read you, but there's nothing rehearsed to decode. You're not unpredictable because you're inconsistent. You're unpredictable because you're authentic. And authenticity doesn't follow scripts. This is where you may ask yourself, why does my presence make people uneasy when I'm not doing anything? Because control depends on expectation. And you don't meet expectations, you exist outside them. You don't perform reactions for anyone's comfort. You don't manage yourself to be digestible. You're not trying to be mysterious, but you don't explain yourself either. That combination is destabilizing to someone who relies on psychological leverage. Here's the part that cuts deepest for him. He knows instinctively that this isn't something he can outthink. You're not a puzzle. Puzzles have solutions. You're a living variable, a force that requires surrender to uncertainty. And uncertainty is the one environment he has never learned to survive in. His confidence was built on foresight, on knowing what comes next, on being prepared. But around you, preparation fails. Around everyone else, he's composed and dominant. Around you, he's alert in a different way, not commanding, measuring, not leading, tracking, because every interaction with you feels like a test he didn't study for. Every word matters more, every move carries risk, and that internal pressure leaks out, no matter how disciplined he is. This is why the fear isn't surface level. It's not about losing face or status. It's deeper than that. He senses that when someone cannot be predicted, they cannot be owned. And when someone cannot be owned, they cannot be controlled. You represent the one thing his world is built to avoid. Independence that doesn't need to announce itself. And the most unsettling truth for him is this. You're not trying to take anything from him. You're not challenging his position. You're not competing for dominance. You're not even interested in the power he holds. You simply exist as yourself. And that's what strips his authority of meaning. Because power only works when someone wants what it offers. You don't. So in your presence, the man who manages outcomes everywhere else is confronted with something he cannot manage. Not a rival, not a threat, but a boundary, a line he can't cross because it doesn't move. That's when it becomes clear, to him and to everyone watching, that control has limits, and you are one of them. Before we move forward, pause for a moment and reflect. If you've ever noticed people losing their certainty around you, if you've felt shifts in energy when you enter a room, or if this message is putting words to experiences you've never been able to explain, this is your space to speak. Write your thoughts in the comments. Share what you've seen, what you've felt, or what this awakened in you. Your voice matters here. When you put your experience into words, you claim it with confidence, and you never know. Your insight might be exactly what someone else needs to recognize their own power. Number 3. Independence dissolves control more effectively than resistance. When you don't need the throne, the king loses his grip. Control dies the moment it realizes it has nothing to offer. This is where the balance truly breaks. Not through rebellion, not through resistance, but through something far more dangerous to anyone who thrives on dominance: your independence. He is accustomed to gravity bending toward him. People orbit because they want something: approval, access, safety, advantage, status. Even opposition still keeps him at the center. Whether they submit or push back, they're still engaged in his system. And that engagement is the fuel. He understands dependency better than most. He's mastered it. He knows how to read what people want and position himself as the gatekeeper. That's how he keeps the rhythm. He leads, others adjust. He speaks, others respond. He moves, others follow. It's a well-rehearsed dance, and he's never had to question his role in it. Until you show up, because you don't move toward him or away from him. You don't lean in, you don't flinch, you don't angle yourself to gain anything. You stand where you are, complete, intact, uninterested in what he controls. And the moment that happens, the choreography collapses, the music stops, the timing breaks. He can't find the beat because you're not listening to it. You don't need his recognition. You don't need his protection. You don't need his resources, his approval, or his permission. You're not impressed, threatened, or strategically curious. You're not there to extract value or prove anything. You exist on your own axis, and that alone dismantles everything he relies on. Here's what people rarely understand. Control doesn't require obedience. It requires need. The second need disappears. Leverage evaporates. And that's exactly what happens around you. His usual instruments, charisma, pressure, persuasion, subtle intimidation, fall flat. They're designed to hook desire or fear. But there's nothing to hook into. No opening, no hunger, no dependency. That's when he becomes unsettled, because for the first time, he's facing someone he can't pull closer or push away. He can't reward you, and he can't punish you in any way that matters. You're not invested in his outcomes, and you're not afraid of his consequences. You're simply free, and freedom is ungovernable. You might wonder, why does this make him uncomfortable instead of indifferent? Because power is not just about control, it's about relevance. When someone doesn't need you, your influence has limits. When someone isn't reacting to you, your presence loses weight. And for someone who's used to being the center of motion, that's deeply destabilizing. Around you, he's forced into unfamiliar territory, a space where authority doesn't automatically translate into compliance, where presence doesn't guarantee attention, where influence has to be earned rather than assumed. This isn't a battlefield he trained for. He doesn't know how to navigate someone who isn't playing for or against him. And the tension shows. Others in the room feel it. They notice how his usual certainty thins out around you, how the energy he commands elsewhere doesn't quite reach you, how his tone adjusts, his posture recalibrates, his confidence pauses just long enough to be seen. You're not challenging him, yet you're exposing a version of him that isn't used to being ineffective. That's the quiet power of someone chosen, not because they seek dominance, but because they are unreachable by it. Your independence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture or provoke. It simply exists, and that existence rewrites the rules. You force him into a dynamic where control isn't inherited by position, reputation, or force, where influence must be mutual or it fails. And because he's rarely had to operate that way, he struggles to adapt. This is why, in a room full of people he can command without effort, you become the anomaly, the variable he can't solve, the presence he can't steer. You don't overthrow him, you don't confront him, you don't resist him, you render him optional. And for someone who built their world on being necessary, that is the one position they cannot tolerate or control. Number 4. Presence can awaken parts of others they forgot existed. Presence is not passive. Real presence disrupts. It reaches places words, authority, and intimidation never touch. This is the part no one warns them about. When someone like you enters their space, you don't just change the atmosphere. You awaken parts of them they buried on purpose. He didn't become polished, controlled, and untouchable by accident. That version of him was built carefully, layer by layer, to survive pressure, to dominate outcomes, to stay ahead. Over time, that version stopped being a tool and became a mask. It protected him from uncertainty, from softness, from anything that might slow him down or make him question himself. The world rewarded that mask, so he kept wearing it. Efficiency mattered more than honesty. Image mattered more than depth. But masks only work when everyone agrees to play along. Around you, something different happens. You don't ask him to drop the act. You don't confront it. You don't even acknowledge it. And that's exactly why it fails. Your presence bypasses the performance entirely. Without effort, without intention, you activate memories and emotions he hasn't allowed himself to feel in years. Not because you're digging, but because you're real. It starts small, a pause he didn't expect, a reaction that doesn't fit his script, the way you carry yourself without needing approval. These details slip past his defenses before he can stop them. Suddenly, emotions he buried for survival begin to surface. Curiosity, doubt, softness, even fear. Not fear of you, but fear of what he's been avoiding. The unsettling part for him is this: he has no strategy for it. There is no rehearsed response for authenticity, no manipulation that works on someone who isn't trying to extract anything, no dominance move that silences someone who isn't impressed or intimidated. Because you aren't provoking him, he can't fight back. Because you aren't analyzing him, he can't outthink you. What rises in him does so naturally, without permission. That's why the shift feels uncontrollable. He begins confronting things he's been running from: old regrets, ignored emotions, unresolved questions about who he became and what it cost him. He may try to suppress it, explain it away, or rebuild the mask tighter than before, but it doesn't hold. Around you, pretending requires too much energy. The illusion cracks again and again. Everywhere else he remains composed. Everywhere else he's efficient, respected, feared. But around you, the human underneath becomes visible, even to himself. And that visibility is deeply destabilizing. He doesn't just feel noticed, he feels remembered. You remind him of who he was before control became identity, before power replaced connection, before success required emotional sacrifice. And you do it without judgment, without pressure, without asking anything from him. That's what makes it unavoidable. You're not there to heal him. You're not there to expose him. Yet your presence functions like a mirror he can't turn away from. The awakening you trigger isn't gentle, but it's real, rare, irreversible. And that is why his grip loosens around you. Not because you challenge his control, but because you awaken what control buried. Number 5. Respect grows where fear no longer has influence. Fear is the oldest shortcut to control. He learned that early. If people are scared of consequences, they comply faster. They don't ask questions. They don't push back. They fall in line. Over time, he refined it into an art. Never always loud, never always obvious, but always present. a look, a pause, a reputation that speaks before he does. And it works. In rooms full of people, fear keeps the structure intact. Obedience masquerades as loyalty. Silence gets mistaken for respect. Power feels absolute. Until you enter, because around you, fear has nowhere to land. You don't calculate how to stay on his good side. You don't soften yourself to avoid friction. You don't mirror his dominance or shrink beneath it. You meet him as you are, steady, composed, unmoved, and that alone dismantles the system he depends on. Not aggressively, not theatrically, quietly, completely. This is the moment where confusion sets in for him. He's used to reactions, used to signals, used to people adjusting their behavior in response to his presence. But you don't give him the feedback loop he expects. There's no flinch to reward him, no hesitation to exploit, no compliance to interpret as control. And when fear stops producing results, influence starts leaking out. You're not trying to prove anything. That's what makes it devastating. You're not resisting him to make a point. You're simply not operating on fear at all. Your decisions aren't driven by what you might lose. Your posture isn't shaped by what he might think. You move from internal alignment, not external pressure. And to someone who has always measured power by how much others bend, that is deeply destabilizing. Here's the truth he's forced to confront in your presence. Authority without consent is fragile. Status without respect is hollow. Influence that depends on intimidation collapses the moment it meets someone who values self-respect over convenience. You don't announce that truth, you embody it. And embodiment is harder to fight than words. That's why his usual tools fail around you. Charm doesn't hook you, pressure doesn't rush you, manipulation finds no leverage. He can't pull strings that aren't attached. He can't threaten what you're not afraid to lose. And suddenly, the man who usually anchors the room feels slightly unmoored. People notice, they always do, the way his shoulders tense just a bit more, the way his words slow down, the way his confidence recalibrates when he addresses you. It's subtle, but it's visible. The center of gravity shifts. Not because you challenged him, but because you didn't submit to the unspoken rules everyone else follows. This is where chosen ones separate themselves without effort. Respect grows naturally where fear has no influence. And that kind of respect can't be forced, bought, or commanded. It emerges when someone stands firm without hostility, calm without submission, and grounded without needing approval. That's why your presence exposes him, not as weak, but as limited, and that exposure is something fear can't protect him from. Number 6. Growth starts when limitations are revealed, not denied. He built his dominance on certainty, not hope, not instinct. Certainty. Every room he enters, he assumes he already knows how it will move, who will fall in line, who will hesitate, who will comply. His confidence doesn't come from courage, it comes from prediction, from repetition, from being right enough times to believe he's untouchable. That's how he became the one people defer to, the one whose voice carries weight before it even rises. Control to him is familiarity dressed up as authority. And then you appear, not loud, not defiant, not disruptive in any obvious way, just present. And suddenly, the math stops working. You don't react when you're supposed to. You don't mirror the behaviors he's learned to anticipate. You don't confirm his assumptions or play your assigned role. And in that moment, something fundamental shifts. The certainty he depends on begins to erode, not publicly, but internally, where it matters most. This is where growth actually begins, not when limits are denied, but when they are exposed. You don't confront him. You don't challenge his position or try to prove anything. You don't test him or poke holes in his logic. You simply operate outside his framework. And that forces him to notice what he's avoided for years. That his understanding of the world is incomplete, that his dominance is conditional, that his control depends on patterns continuing uninterrupted. Around you, those patterns break. He tries the usual methods: influence, pressure, subtle intimidation, strategic charm. None of it lands, not because you're resistant, but because you're unavailable to manipulation. Your reactions don't follow scripts, your responses don't match formulas, and for the first time in a long time, he's dealing with someone he can't pre-calculate. That realization unsettles him more than open opposition ever could, because opposition confirms power. Unpredictability questions it. You challenge the story he tells himself, that he's always prepared, always ahead, always the sharpest mind in the room, and when that story cracks, even slightly, he feels it everywhere. His posture tightens. His tone shifts. He pauses longer than he means to. He recalculates mid-sentence. These are small things, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but everyone feels the difference. The man who usually moves with ease is suddenly adjusting in real time. You've become the unknown variable in a system that relied on certainty, and unknown variables don't just disrupt outcomes, they expose limits. You remind him, without effort or intention, that experience has edges, that reputation has blind spots, that control is never absolute. This is why he loses his footing around you, not because you overpower him, but because you exist beyond his reach. You are unshakable not through resistance, but through independence. You cannot be anticipated, bought, or steered. And that forces a truth he can't escape. No matter how much someone runs, manages, or commands, control always ends somewhere. And that boundary begins with you. Everyone notices, not because you announce it, but because the one who runs everything suddenly has to think twice. And that hesitation tells the whole story. Number 7. Balance shifts naturally when equality is embodied. He has always lived inside a structure he designed for his own advantage, a silent ladder where he stands at the top, and everyone else knows, without being told, where they belong beneath him. That hierarchy governs how he speaks, how he listens, how he moves through rooms. It tells him who deserves patience, who deserves pressure, and who deserves to be ignored. Over time, that structure became automatic, almost invisible to him, like gravity. He stopped questioning it because it always worked. Until you entered the frame, you didn't announce yourself as an equal. You didn't challenge him, test him, or compete with him. You did something far more disruptive. You showed up without adjusting your position. No lowering, no reaching, no posturing, just grounded presence. And that alone began to destabilize the order he relies on, because hierarchies only function when everyone agrees to play their assigned role. You didn't. What makes this unsettling for him is that the shift doesn't happen on the surface. There's no argument to win, no confrontation to dominate, no behavior he can label as disrespect. Instead, something internal recalibrates. He finds himself slowing down around you, rethinking words he normally fires off without hesitation, watching your reactions more closely than he intends to, not because you demand attention, but because his usual metrics stop working. Around you, intimidation produces no data. Manipulation yields no leverage. Authority doesn't translate into control. The signals he uses to orient himself, fear, compliance, admiration, go quiet. And in that silence, he's forced to operate without a map. For someone who has built his confidence on always knowing where he stands in relation to others, this is deeply destabilizing. You don't try to be his equal, yet equality emerges, not as a statement, but as a fact. He senses it in the pauses that creep into his speech, in the way his posture softens without intention, in the care he suddenly takes with his tone. He begins treating you differently before he understands why. And that lack of understanding is what disturbs him most. Because this isn't something he can override with strategy. He can't reassert dominance where none is being challenged. He can't win against someone who isn't competing. You've shifted his internal ranking system without ever touching it directly. You've become a variable his hierarchy can't place. Others notice it too. They see the man who usually takes up space begin to share it. They catch the fleeting hesitation, the recalibration, the attention sharpened in your direction. It's subtle, but undeniable. Something about you bends the balance without force. And here's the truth you need to understand. This isn't something you do, it's something you embody. You carry yourself without reference to dominance or submission. You move as if equality is the default, not a reward to be granted. And when equality is embodied, not demanded, power structures quietly rearrange themselves. That's why he's off balance. That's why the room feels different. Because for the first time in a long time, he's not standing above someone or over them. He's standing across from someone, and he doesn't know how to handle that. Number 8. Reputation fades, but genuine connection remains. Reputation is loud, but it's fragile. It's built on repetition, rumor, and reinforcement from people who never look too closely. He has lived inside that echo chamber for years, long enough to confuse recognition with relevance and fear with respect. Everywhere he goes, the story arrives before he does. People adjust their posture, their tone, their expectations. They respond to what they've heard, not to what's actually standing in front of them. And that's how his reputation became his shield and his sword at the same time. It works until you enter the room. Around you, the stories fall flat. The aura doesn't land. The carefully curated image doesn't hook into anything. Not because you're unimpressed, but because you're unmoved. You don't engage with legends. You engage with reality. You don't react to reputation. You respond to presence. And the moment you do that, his greatest advantage dissolves. This is where the discomfort begins for him. He's used to being met halfway by assumptions, used to people filling in the gaps in his favor before he even speaks. But you don't do that. You don't project greatness onto him, and you don't project threat either. You meet him where he actually is. That strips away the buffer he relies on. Suddenly, he's not operating through perception anymore. He's standing in direct contact with someone who refuses to be influenced by narrative. And that is deeply unsettling. You might wonder why this creates tension instead of relief. Shouldn't being seen be a good thing? Only for people who aren't hiding behind a brand. For someone whose power depends on distance and distortion, genuine connection feels like exposure. You collapse the gap he uses to maneuver. You remove the fog that allows him to stay in control. When reputation stops working, he has to rely on who he actually is. And that's a position he hasn't trained for. So you see it happen in real time. The pause before he speaks, the subtle shift in posture, the way confidence flickers, not dramatically, but just enough for others to notice. He's recalibrating because the usual tools aren't effective. There's no script for this interaction, no leverage, no advantage embedded in perception. Just presence meeting presence, and everyone else feels it, even if they can't name it. The room senses that something has changed. The man who normally commands the atmosphere is suddenly navigating it. You haven't challenged him. You haven't disrespected him. You've done something far more disruptive. You've made his reputation irrelevant. In a space where his name usually does the heavy lifting, he now has to show up without it. That's why this moment matters. Reputation fades the moment it's not fed. Genuine connection doesn't, and you operate from the latter. You represent a space where influence must be earned in real time, not inherited from stories. A space where presence outweighs projection. A space where control gives way to authenticity. For someone who runs everything, that's terrifying. For you, it's natural, and that's exactly why the balance shifts the second you arrive. Number 9. Intention matters more than image in meaningful interactions. He is accustomed to a world that responds to appearances. Symbols, status, labels, and carefully constructed impressions do the heavy lifting for him. Before he speaks, the room has already decided how to treat him. That's how he maintains control, by staying ahead of perception, by letting image do the work so he doesn't have to reveal anything real. Most people meet the projection, react to the signal, and play their assigned role without even realizing it. But around you, that system stops working. You don't adjust your behavior to his titles or credentials. You don't lean forward because of influence, and you don't lean back because of intimidation. Instead of responding to what he displays, you pay attention to what he means. You listen beneath the words. You watch beneath the posture. You sense direction, not decoration. And that alone is enough to disrupt everything he relies on. This is where the imbalance begins. Because when someone is evaluated by intent rather than image, there's nowhere to hide. He's used to a transactional environment. Do this, get that. Project this, receive compliance. The script is familiar, predictable, efficient. People react to the costume and never ask who's inside it. You don't follow that script. You don't even acknowledge it. You engage with the present moment as it is, not as it's supposed to appear. That forces him into unfamiliar territory. He can't lean on charm to redirect you. He can't inflate authority to gain ground. He can't distract with performance or overwhelm with presence. Every move he makes is quietly observed, not judged, but understood. And that understanding is far more unsettling than criticism could ever be. What happens next is subtle but undeniable. He starts monitoring himself. Not because you challenged him, but because you didn't react the way he expected. When image fails to produce control, awareness takes its place. He becomes conscious of tone, choice, motive. The mask grows heavy because it no longer earns automatic results. And in a space where truth matters more than impression, false confidence has no leverage. This is the power of those who are chosen, not by destiny, but by clarity. You are not impressed by noise. You are not distracted by shine. You are oriented toward what's real. That orientation turns every interaction into a mirror, whether you intend it or not. And people who have spent years refining appearance are rarely prepared to meet themselves in reflection. Others notice the change before he does. The slight pause in his speech, the recalibration of his stance, the focused attention that wasn't there before. He's engaging differently because he has to. Around you, manipulation doesn't land. Performance doesn't persuade. Only sincerity carries weight. And that's what makes your presence disruptive. You don't compete for control. You remove the illusion that control comes from image at all. You reveal without effort that what truly matters in any meaningful interaction is intent. And once that truth is exposed, nothing superficial can stand comfortably again. That is why he runs everything until he's around you. Number 10. True regard is earned through integrity, not authority. He built his dominance on fear long before he ever built it on skill. Fear was efficient. It made rooms go quiet. It made people comply without questions. It made outcomes predictable. Everywhere he went, people adjusted themselves around him, not because they believed in him, but because they didn't want the consequences of resisting him. That kind of authority looks powerful from the outside, but it's brittle at the core. It only survives as long as people stay afraid. And then there's you. Around you, the entire structure stops working. You don't stiffen when he enters. You don't lower your voice. You don't calculate how to stay on his good side. You speak when it's your turn, stay silent when it isn't, and move as if his presence doesn't determine your position. That alone destabilizes him. Not because you oppose him, but because you don't validate the system he relies on to feel powerful. You treat him like a person, not a threat. And that's the moment the shift happens. He expects fear. He knows how to manage fear. He knows how to reward it, punish it, exploit it. What he doesn't know how to handle is neutrality mixed with integrity. Someone who won't be bullied, but also won't be baited. Someone who doesn't flinch, yet doesn't posture. Someone who isn't impressed and isn't intimidated. That combination short-circuits everything he knows about control. This is where he begins to realize something he's spent his entire life avoiding. Fear creates obedience, not regard. It forces movement, but it never earns alignment. And you make that truth impossible to ignore. You don't clap for his authority. You don't push against it either. You simply stand outside its reach. And suddenly all the power he thought he had feels smaller, thinner, conditional. He can't pressure you into compliance. He can't charm you into submission. He can't provoke you into reacting. The usual levers don't move anything, and that's deeply unsettling for someone whose identity depends on being able to move people at will. Around you, he's forced to confront the reality that influence without integrity has an expiration date. What makes it worse for him is that everyone else sees it happening. They notice the hesitation where there used to be certainty, the careful choice of words where there used to be commands, the subtle recalibration of tone, posture, and pace. He's still powerful, but the power looks different now, checked, measured, aware. Not diminished, but exposed. You haven't taken anything from him. You've simply removed the illusion that fear equals respect. And once that illusion cracks, it can't be fully repaired. This is the quiet strength of those who are chosen by character, not position. You don't need to dominate to be influential. You don't need to intimidate to be taken seriously. Your integrity does the work for you. It sets a boundary no authority can cross. It forces accountability without confrontation. And that's why he runs everything, except himself, around you. Because fear may control rooms, but integrity controls reality. Number 11. Power without connection reveals what fulfillment requires. He built his life around leverage, influence, authority, control. Those became the language he spoke fluently. He learned early that power moves people faster than honesty ever could, that fear produces results, that dominance simplifies outcomes. And it worked. It worked so well that he never noticed what it was costing him. While he was busy mastering systems and people, something else was quietly being neglected. Not strategy, not intelligence, connection. Power became his substitute for fulfillment. Control replaced closeness. Command replaced understanding. Over time, the parts of him that wanted to be seen without armor, heard without posturing, met without expectation, were pushed aside. Not destroyed, just buried. And because the world rewarded his strength, no one ever asked what was missing underneath it. Everyone else feeds the persona. They react to the image he presents. Confident, decisive, untouchable. They don't look for anything deeper because they don't need to. The surface is enough to keep them impressed, obedient, or cautious. That constant reinforcement allows him to avoid the quiet truth. That dominance without connection eventually hollows a person out. And then there's you. You don't approach him as an object of power. You don't orbit his status. You don't mirror the fear or admiration he's used to seeing reflected back. You meet him directly, without agenda, without hunger, without performance. And that alone changes the atmosphere. Because for the first time in a long time, he's not being responded to, he's being recognized. Around you, what's missing becomes obvious. Not to the room at first, but to him. The emotional gaps he's ignored start surfacing. The empathy he sidelined, the vulnerability he labeled inefficient, the quiet desire for something real that never fit into his model of control. You don't force these things out. You don't confront him with them. You simply exist in a way that doesn't allow him to hide from them. That's what unsettles him. He's used to operating through tactics, reading angles, adjusting pressure, calculating outcomes. But none of that applies here. There's nothing to manipulate, nothing to leverage, nothing to win. Your presence removes the chessboard entirely, and without it, he's left facing something unfamiliar, himself, without distractions. This is where his certainty weakens, not publicly, not dramatically, but internally. The polished image still holds for everyone else. The authority remains intact. The confidence appears unchanged, yet around you the imbalance shows. He feels the cost of what he built. He senses the absence of what power alone could never give him. You don't ask him to soften. You don't demand honesty. You don't invite confession. And that's exactly why it works. Because nothing disarms someone faster than being unable to buy, command, or control the moment they're in. You create a space where performance is useless and avoidance fails. This is the part chosen ones often misunderstand. You're not here to fix anyone. You're not here to rescue, correct, or expose them. Your role is simpler and more disruptive than that. By operating from wholeness instead of hunger, you reveal what fulfillment actually requires. And for someone who built an empire without it, that realization hits harder than any challenge ever could. Number 12. Being real is more impactful than performing strength. Being real carries an impact that performance never can, and this is where his advantage collapses around you. He has spent years refining an image, polishing reactions, scripting responses, and mastering the art of appearing untouchable. Every interaction has been intentional. Every movement has served a purpose. He learned early that control comes from presentation, and presentation comes from never letting the mask slip. The world responds to that kind of discipline. People listen. People follow. People assume strength because it looks convincing. But the moment you enter the space, the rules quietly shift. Around you, the performance loses relevance, not because you challenge it, but because you don't participate in it. You don't reward the theatrics. You don't react to the intimidation. You don't adjust your energy to accommodate the image. And that absence of expectation disarms him in a way force never could. For someone who has controlled outcomes by managing perception, being in a space where perception no longer works is deeply unsettling. You engage without scripts. You speak without calculation. You look at him as a person, not a position. And suddenly, the persona he's relied on has nowhere to land. There is no stage, no audience, no applause, just presence, just reality. That forces him into unfamiliar territory where he can't hide behind reputation or authority. He becomes aware of himself, not as a figure to maintain, but as a human being responding in real time. That awareness is what makes him vulnerable. When performance drops, truth surfaces. The parts of himself he buried beneath strategy and status begin to rise. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. Fatigue, doubt, long-suppressed honesty. He feels the weight of how exhausting it has been to always be on, to constantly manage impressions, to maintain dominance without rest. Around you, there is no pressure to prove anything, and that freedom is both relieving and frightening. Others notice it, even if they can't explain it. His energy shifts. The sharpness dulls, the certainty pauses. The rigid control loosens just enough to be visible. It's subtle but unmistakable. The man who dominates every other room suddenly adjusts himself around you, as if recalibrating without instructions. What gives you influence here isn't power, status, or strategy. It's authenticity. You don't overpower him by force. You don't confront him directly. You simply allow him to exist without the mask. And that does something no tactic ever could. You create a space where dominance doesn't function and performance isn't required. And that is why he runs everything except around you. You don't respond to power the way others do. You don't reinforce the story he's built. Instead, you reflect reality back to him, exposing where the image ends and the person begins. Fear loses its leverage. Status stops mattering. Control has to give way to something real. You don't demand change, yet change happens. Quietly, involuntarily, irreversibly. This is the effect of someone who exists on their own terms, someone who can't be manipulated because they aren't playing a role, someone whose presence alone disrupts systems built on performance. And once that disruption happens, it leaves a mark, one that can't be undone and can't be ignored.